Good afternoon, and thank you for being here. We are gathered here on the traditional territory of the signatories of Treaty 7 and recognize the Métis people who share a deep connection with this land. I am Sarah Elmeligi, Alberta NDP Critic for Environment and Tourism, and I'm joined here today by Nagwan Al-Guneid, Alberta NDP Critic for Energy and Climate. One of the most unifying opinions among Albertans in the last few years has been the opposition to coal mining on the eastern slopes. When the UCP rescinded the 1976 coal policy in 2020, Albertans from all walks of life and political stripes spoke against the decision. Polls concluded that 77% of Albertans said they were concerned about the impact coal mining could have on Alberta's rivers, and half of Albertans opposed the measures the UCP took without consultation. 9 months later, the UCP reinstated a version of that coal policy, along with a moratorium on new coal development on the eastern slopes, with a few exceptions for advanced projects. And while the policy itself is problematic in that it can still be removed as easily as the 1976 policy was that long weekend in 2020, Albertans felt as though the UCP finally heard the message that they do not want coal mining in the eastern slopes. Unfortunately, that message does not seem to be clear to the UCP's newest leader and the Premier, Danielle Smith. The proposed Grassy Mountain coal mine was one of those advanced projects, and it was denied by both a federal and provincial review panel and the AER and the previous UCP government. Then in November last year, an exploration proposal came forward from Northback Holdings, the same company whose Grassy Mountain mine had been rejected. While most Albertans couldn't even understand how a denied project could even be permitted to submit an exploration application, let alone approve it, Danielle Smith had her energy minister pen a letter to the Alberta Energy Regulator siding with Northback Holdings and directing the AER to move the project forward to public hearing. The regulator did an about-face and accepted Northback Holdings' application and promised public hearings. For more on that, I'll pass things over to Nagwan.
Thank you, Sarah. The ongoing influence by the UCP in the AER is deeply troubling. In 2021, the AER's Joint Review Panel concluded that the significant adverse environmental effects of the project far outweighs the low to moderate positive economic impacts it could have. The panel stated that the Grassy Mountain project is not in the public interest. But 2 years later, now with the new UCP government, the company applied again to drill 46 new exploratory boreholes in Grassy Mountain. All during a time Danielle Smith and the UCP were awarding contracts to their friend and former Wildrose Party president, David Yeager, to do a review on the AER and on the future of energy in Alberta. Now, since penning a letter to the regulator in support of this strip mining coal project, Danielle Smith has appointed her friend David Yeager to the board of the Alberta Energy Regulator. And while being an independent AER board member, David Yeager has been awarded a contract for $136,000 for professional services to the Premier's office. It is deeply troubling to have a so-called independent board member of a regulator who receives sole-sourced contracts from a political office. This constant interference by Brian Jean and Danielle Smith shakes public confidence in our regulatory systems. And despite Albertans' unified and loud objections to strip mining in the eastern slopes, and despite the regulator previously stating the Grassy Mountain project would not be in the public's interest, the UCP are leaning on the regulator to approve a project that should not be going forward whatsoever. The government should be focused on regulatory reform and making the AER a credible regulator to address industry liabilities, not stripping the top of the Rockies for coal mining and not interfering in our regulatory process. Now back to Sarah.
Thank you, Nagwan. Last week, we learned Northback Holdings has requested their Grassy Mountain project timeline be accelerated and that the public hearing be completed by the end of June. However, the municipal district of Ranchlands, where the project is located, has applied for permission to appeal the AER's decision for the project to go to public hearing, thus requesting a stay of the AER's decision pending the outcome of the appeal. We know that the AER's acceptance of moving the project forward only came after the letter in support for the coal mine from the Minister of Energy and Minerals, Brian Jean. And Northback wants to ignore the municipality's appeal and have hearings on the project before the matters goes through the court's due process. To organize and deliver a public hearing by June 30th is too small a window for participants to adequately prepare. And it's disrespectful to the Municipal District of Ranchland's appeal. Simultaneously, private landowners are still working through a court process to have FOIP documents released, unveiling how the decisions to rescind the coal policy came about in the first place. The minister has filed an appeal to a court decision, forcing him to release those documents. So while Albertans are seeking more information and being denied through court appeals, those same Albertans are being expected to support accelerating a process for public hearing and decision while one of their appeals is before the courts. The hypocrisy astounds. Albertans have been clear that they do not want to see coal mining on the eastern slopes, but Danielle Smith and the UCP have refused to listen. Last week, our opposition leader, Rachel Notley, reintroduced the Eastern Slopes Protection Act. This bill would protect our mountains by law and accomplish what Albertans have been so clear they want, that the province permanently ban coal mining and exploration activity in Category 1 and 2 lands and halt all mining and exploration activity in Category 3 and 4 lands pending regional planning processes and consultations with Albertans. We are calling on Danielle Smith and Brian Jean today to listen to Albertans and commit to passing the Eastern Slopes Protection Act. We are calling on the UCP government to adhere to their own previous decisions and to stop interfering or supporting the AER's premature approval of developments that are before the courts. Thank you, and we're happy to take any questions.
All right, thank you both. We'll now go to questions. So just a reminder to those who are joining us on the phone lines to use *9, and for those who are joining us on Zoom, to use the raise hand function to get into the question queue. All right, we'll start with Sean. Your line is open.
Okay, in the City News. Recent polling for CBC found that more than half of Albertans are struggling to pay their bills, but there wasn't much from the government on affordability in the last session. Was that a mistake?
Yes, I'm going to turn that over to Nagwan because she follows the affordability pieces more closely.
Yeah, I mean, this session was marred with bills that no one asked for. We had Bill 18, Bill 20, Bill 21, and they're all undemocratic bills that strip our democratic rights. We saw some from basically taking elected officials from their roles. We saw extension of the political office by 7 months or 6 months. Look, Albertans right now are struggling with the cost of living. We have spent like thousands of hours door knocking, especially in my riding in Calgary, Glenmore, and I've heard from many Albertans that the cost of living, the cost of utility bills, the cost of groceries are just out of control, and people are struggling. So this is a government that did not show a focus on real tactics and real bills that will change the status quo right now for Albertans. So absolutely, it was a missed opportunity this session.
Nishan, do you have a follow-up?
Yeah, what should the government be doing to help people pay their bills? What would an NDP government do at this time to help people pay their bills?
Yeah, I mean, there's always a short-term measure and a long-term measure. So for short-term measures, we've always talked about short-term caps on utility bills, on these immediate bills that face Albertans every day. But then when we look on the long term, we should have a better housing strategy. We need to focus on building more homes so people can actually, we can increase that supply in housing. So we see that increased supply, which reduces the cost of housing overall. We should be seeing as well a focus on diversifying our electricity grid. We saw a government that banned renewables, which is a low-cost energy supply. So we need more low-cost energy supply coming into our grid, which will eventually reduce the utility bills. It is a system-focused thinking here. We need to zoom out and see where are the areas that are big pain for Albertans. So again, I want to say there's the short-term tactics to help Albertans right away, and then there's long-term measures to help them in the long run.
All right, we'll do another pass for questions. All right, Bob, your line is open.
Hello. The first question is a very simple one. Why is it a bad thing for a minister to interfere in the deliberations of a body that's supposed to be arm's length? I mean, doesn't the government have a right to direct agencies of government to follow its policies?
Yeah, that's a really good question, Bob. It's nice to hear your voice, by the way. So, you know, the reason why these arm's length agencies are created is to establish that independence in decision making so that the politics of the day does not necessarily influence the outcome of those decisions. So these bodies, like the Alberta Energy Regulator, are designed to be independent from government, following independent processes, so that theoretically, regardless of who the premier is and who the government in power is, the AER would come to the same decision because they're independent and following an independent process. But we are not seeing that, particularly on this coal file and other issues in the oil sands. The AER is really not necessarily coming to conclusions that are supported by data and evidence or public consultation results. And then, you know, on top of that, we've got the Minister of Energy writing to the AER, directing them on particular direction to take, and that really violates that independence principle of agencies like the Alberta Energy Regulator.
Any follow-up?
Yeah. I'm wondering if you've noticed a similar pattern in the UCP government's treatment of other government agencies.
I can take that.
Yeah, go ahead, Nagwan.
Thanks, Bob. So we've been seeing this consistent pattern of political interference in the agencies. We're seeing this right now with the AER by this letter from the Minister of Energy. We saw this with the ISO. We saw the FOIP documents showing that the board chair, which was appointed by the UCP, pressuring the CEO of the ISO. So that is extremely problematic. This weakens the public confidence in our public agencies, in our regulatory processes. In a time where the ministers need to be focused on building more credible regulators, we're seeing this consistent pattern of political interference in the AER, in the ISO, and potentially the AUC, and that is very concerning.
All right, we'll do another pass for questions. Okay, with no more questions, that concludes our press conference. Thanks, folks.